Do deists and practitioners of CCT celebrate the birthdays of any religious figures?
Deities both great and small are generally thought to have birthdays because the vast majority of them were once human beings. CCT has transformed numerous figures originally deist, Buddhist, and Confucian into more comfortable characters, members of everybody's family, in effect. Other deities remain in their more exalted original deist forms. The following are only a few of the literally hundreds of divine birthday dates. Among the earliest in the year is the Jade Emperor, celebrated on the 9th of the first month. On the third day of the second month, CCT acknowledges Wen Changde, the god of literature and learning. Guanyin's birthday occurs on the 19th of the second month. Xiantian Shangdi, the supreme emperor of dark heaven, was born on the 3rd of the third month and is celebrated in some 400 Taiwanese temples. A quasi-deist deity called the Great Emperor who protects life, Bao Sheng Da Di, is celebrated on the 15th of the third month. Ma Ziu, often referred to as the Great Aunt or Grandma, has her celebration on the 23rd of the third month. On the 13th day of month 5 the general become deity Guandi gets his due. An otherwise anonymous city god's day is the 15th of the 6th month. Devotees of CCT observe the birthdays of Cao Jun on the 3rd day of the 8th month, and that of Tu Digong on the 15th. Also on the 3rd of that month deists celebrate the birthday of Si Ming, the director of destiny, known in CCT as the kitchen god or hearth deity.
Do deists and practitioners of CCT celebrate the birthdays of any religious figures?
Deities both great and small are generally thought to have birthdays because the vast majority of them were once human beings. CCT has transformed numerous figures originally deist, Buddhist, and Confucian into more comfortable characters, members of everybody's family, in effect. Other deities remain in their more exalted original deist forms. The following are only a few of the literally hundreds of divine birthday dates. Among the earliest in the year is the Jade Emperor, celebrated on the 9th of the first month. On the third day of the second month, CCT acknowledges Wen Changde, the god of literature and learning. Guanyin's birthday occurs on the 19th of the second month. Xiantian Shangdi, the supreme emperor of dark heaven, was born on the 3rd of the third month and is celebrated in some 400 Taiwanese temples. A quasi-deist deity called the Great Emperor who protects life, Bao Sheng Da Di, is celebrated on the 15th of the third month. Ma Ziu, often referred to as the Great Aunt or Grandma, has her celebration on the 23rd of the third month. On the 13th day of month 5 the general become deity Guandi gets his due. An otherwise anonymous city god's day is the 15th of the 6th month. Devotees of CCT observe the birthdays of Cao Jun on the 3rd day of the 8th month, and that of Tu Digong on the 15th. Also on the 3rd of that month Daoists celebrate the birthday of Si Ming, the director of destiny, known in CCT as the kitchen god or hearth deity.
Are music and dance important in Buddhist religious ritual?
Formal Buddhist rituals generally do not incorporate music as such, with the exception of more recent denominations that have absorbed practices from Protestant Christianity. Chanting and rhythmic recitation use tones other than those of normal speech but are not usually done to musical accompaniment. Buddhist rituals do, however, make extensive use of a wide variety of sounds and percussive devices. Bells, gongs, drums, hollow blocks, and clappers of many sizes are standard equipment in different areas of temples and monasteries. Large and medium-sized bells signal the beginning of worship services, and Zen masters use smaller bells to signal the end of sessions with individual monks. Large drums announce the time for certain exercises and gatherings. The most common ritual use of sound devices is that of keeping time during recitation and chanting or scriptural texts. Hollow blocks make a hypnotic clop to focus the attention, and heavy bronze bowls emit a rich lingering note that reminds worshippers of the impermanence of all things. The combination of sustained warm bell-like tones punctuated by stark wooden percussion is very effective and surprisingly easy to listen to. Buddhists in various parts of the world sometimes use music and dance paraliturgically, that is, outside of their primary ritual settings. Zen meditative mood, for example, is often associated with the haunting sound of the bamboo flute called the shakuhachi, and Tibetans have traditionally used vigorous dancing in ceremonies such as exorcism and other protective rituals.
How do Buddhists celebrate birth or initiation or other rites of passage?
Buddhist tradition generally marks fewer of life's passages than, say, Hindu tradition, and ceremonies are typically much simpler. Rites of passage also vary considerably from one region to another. Here are a couple of representative ceremonies observed by some Japanese Buddhists of one of the Pure Land groups. A special celebration marks the child's 7th day of life. On the 100th day, the family gathers at the temple to symbolize the baby's taking refuge in the three jewels and becoming a spiritual child of the Buddha. Some Pure Land Buddhists also acknowledge a variation on the theme of coming of age or puberty rite. The young man or woman stands before the altar and reaffirms the desire to adhere to Buddhist values. One symbol of the young person's attainment of adulthood is a white cloth inscribed Amida Buddha. There is no set day for these ceremonies, but they sometimes occur on anniversaries or when the chief abbot can be present. Rituals of death and mourning are the most important rites of passage for Buddhists generally, with nuptials perhaps second in importance.
What was the earliest Daoist sacred text?
First and most influential of the Daoist sacred texts is the Dao De Jing, classic of the way and its power. Traditionally attributed to Lao Zi, the text actually dates from between 300 and 250 BCE. Authorship and immediate historical context remain uncertain. Its attribution to the Old Master may have arisen out of a desire to lend the text greater legitimacy and credibility. The Dao De Jing's 81 tantalizing short poems brim with paradox, as they try to describe the indescribable by saying what it is not. Just as the value of a cup is the emptiness within, so the way progresses by, apparently, going backwards. As all of nature acts without conscious effort, so the person who strives in hope of gain loses all. The curiously attractive teaching of the Dao De Jing emphasizes the way of utter simplicity. Divided into two parts, poems 1 to 37 focus on the way. Poems 38 to 81 on its power. Some describe the way as the passive principle and its power as primal spiritual energy. Anyone who tries to define the way must know that it remains indefinable. Dao is the source of all energy but eludes discovery. Imperceptible yet irresistible, impersonal yet ever present, the Dao's power is like that of water. The softest of all elements inevitably dissolves the hardest. Although the text may sometimes give the impression that it favors the more mysterious female yin over the male yang. That is perhaps a result of its need to counter prevalent social biases. In the end, life can proceed only with a perfect balance of yin and yang. Mountain and valley, light and dark, dry and moist, evident and hidden.
How do Daoists view their traditions' relationships to other traditions?
By the beginning of the first millennium, philosophically minded Daoists had rubbed elbows for several centuries with proponents of a cultural and ethical system often identified as Confucian. Together the Confucians and the Daoists were increasingly important elements of a larger cultural matrix. Religion, for which they had as yet no specific term, was a blend of ancient divinatory rites, ancestor veneration, exorcism, and offerings meant to secure blessings and protection from heaven, and several other fairly generic and non-personal divine powers. Religious Daoism evolved during the period when Buddhism was taking root in China. It was not until Chinese Buddhism was several centuries old that Chinese thinkers began to talk of three ways of being both Chinese and religious. It is as though the Chinese people had not thought of their ancient traditions as anything but the way things are. rather like the air they breathed. Until an imported form of thinking and acting called the way of the Buddha entered the scene. Buddhist-deist relations have had a checkered history. At first many deists regarded Buddhism as a new deist school or sect. Thanks to Buddhist efforts at translating key concepts into terms deists would understand. Before long, full-scale hostility developed when deists began to think of the missionary-minded Buddhists as a threat. Confucians often sided with deists in condemning Buddhism as un-Chinese. Periods of persecution of Buddhists alternated with rich interchange and mutual influence. Since the 1800s, deist-Buddhist relations have been much more stable and peaceful, so that many Chinese now perceive few or no important distinctions or barriers between the two traditions. CCT has been a kind of meeting ground. As for deist-Confucian relations, there has been intermittent rivalry for imperial patronage. The two traditions share a great deal in the way of broad doctrinal and cultural themes, such as the so-called yin/yang worldview and ancestor veneration. During the Confucian revival of the 12th and 13th centuries, a development often dubbed Neo-Confucianism, there was renewed positive interaction and mutual exchange of ideas. Nowadays, relations remain generally cordial, but without much substantial discussion of core belief.
Have there been any other sub-communities or denominations within Daoism?
Dozens of other schools and sects have arisen over the long history of religious Daoism. The Great Purity School, Shangqing, also known as Mount Mao. Maoshan, Daoism, arose during the late 4th century. The Shangqing claims as its central revelation a set of scriptural texts in over 30 volumes. Almost contemporary in origin with that school is another called the Lingbao. It also claims a distinctive scriptural revelation, based in part on the Shangqing scripture. Heavenly Mind, Tianxian, Daoism, emphasizing the importance of exorcism and based also on its own scriptural revelation, began in the late 10th century. The Divine Highest Heaven, Shenxiao, school, dating from the 12th century, is best known for its talismans of legendary potency and its elucidation of correspondences between the microcosm of the body and the macrocosm of the universe. Great Oneness, Taiyi, Daoism, also from the 12th century, was a celibate monastic school important for its integration of Confucian and Buddhist elements. Though none of these schools remains active today, all have made significant historical contributions to the large and complex reality called Daoism.
Where do members of local Daoist communities and members of CCT come together?
By far the most important Daoist and CCT gathering places are local temples and shrines, as well as the elaborate but temporary altars set up in open spaces for the larger religious ceremonies. Temples vary in size and wealth and, naturally, the smaller the temple the more likely it is to serve a purely ritual purpose and not to have room for other activities. Community temples at the center of towns and villages often serve as multi-purpose facilities. There might be any number of functions going on at one time: classes for children, play during recess, community meetings while worshippers attend to their devotional needs. In larger towns and cities, other organizations, such as various Daoist and Buddhist associations, apparently fill some of those communal functions as well. Most people still think of Daoist and CCT temples primarily as ritual facilities that also serve as centers of parish life. Temples typically govern their ordinary affairs through an elected committee, entrusted with all major decisions about ritual calendar, maintenance, and finance.
Where do Daoists live today? Are any estimates of numbers available? How about CCT?
Until fairly recently, Daoism has been an almost exclusively Chinese phenomenon. Since the Maoist Revolution of 1949, practice of Daoism in the People's Republic of China has diminished dramatically. Buddhism had the advantage of being an international tradition and thus of at least limited political utility. In addition, Buddhism qualified officially as a religion while Daoism was defined as mere superstition. Daoist temples and monasteries were shut down or destroyed, and thousands of Daoist ritual specialists had to seek other means of livelihood. Things have taken a turn for the better since the 1980s. Monasteries have reopened, and as of 1995 counts, Daoist temples number over 600, with about 10 times that number of nuns and priests. Some institutions have even managed to revive formal seminary training for ritual specialists. The Celestial Masters School and the Monastic Order of Chuanzhen Complete Realization School are the liveliest Daoist organizations in the People's Republic now. Many hundreds of temples are active in Hong Kong and Taiwan. Many more belonging to CCT than to specifically Daoist groups. Elsewhere in Asia, wherever significant populations of Chinese have gathered, such as Malaysia and Singapore, Daoism and CCT are growing but are still relatively small. Active Daoists may number several million, while adherents of CCT may number between 100 and 200 million. These numbers seem relatively small next to counts of other major traditions, but they do not include the many millions of people whose days are full of ancient symbols and small rituals. Even if they are not formally identified with the institutional trappings of Daoism or CCT.
Is the contemporary sect Falun Gong Daoist?
Falun Gong, Dharma will cultivation, also called Falun Dafa, Dharma will of the Buddha way. was founded in 1992 by Li Hongzhi and received official approval by China's Research Society of Qigong Science. Its principal symbol is a circle with a clockwise rotating swastika at its center. Around the central swastika are 4 Taiji symbols. At the cardinal directions, alternating with 4 more swastikas. The swastika is an ancient symbol of apparently South or Central Asian origin that has long been associated with both Hinduism and Buddhism. The iconographic significance of the various rotating symbols is related to the concept of chakras, or energy centers, within the body. Within each person, therefore, resides a miniature of the whole spinning cosmos. This correspondence between the microcosm of the individual and the macrocosm of the universe is an important link to Daoist thought. Falun Gong advertises itself as an alternative to traditional religious traditions such as Daoism and Buddhism, and to practices such as Qigong and Taiji Chuan. Its spiritual leader, Li Hongzhi, says his purpose is to bring ancient wisdom again within reach of ordinary people who find the traditional systems no longer helpful. Drawing on Daoist imagery, Falun Gong's meditative method, combined with ritual movement, aims at helping practitioners to balance, maximize, and release their energies. Chinese authorities almost certainly had complex motives in attempting to suppress the sect in 1999. One concern may be the ancient connection religious Daoism had with messianic and revolutionary movements.
Are there any Daoist holy places?
Mountains are the most prominent of Daoism's sacred sites. But they were sacred to the Chinese long before Daoism. 4 mountains marked the cardinal directions of ancient Chinese symbolic geography, and a 5th was eventually added at the center. Perhaps in connection with the notion of 5 elements: earth, air, water, fire, and metal. Each mountain has its chief deity who discharges his own distinctive duties. A number of individual mountains in addition to the main 5 also possess special properties and are connected with particular deities or Daoist sects and schools. Mount Heming, Sichuan Province, is famed as the place where Zhang Daoling inaugurated religious Daoism. Daoists share Mount Zhongnan, Shenzi Province, with Buddhists as a sacred site. The Celestial Masters School established its center on Mount Longhu, Jiangxi Province. Hundreds of Daoist and Buddhist temples have stood on dozens of such sacred peaks. 2 related features of Daoist sacred geography are the system of 10 great and 36 lesser grotto heavens and 7 Taituo blessed spots, some of which are located on famed mountains. These sites, mostly caves, are so designated because they are foci of sacred energy. They are often associated with religious figures believed to have found meditative solitude there and are likened to heavenly dwellings.
What has been the shaman's role in Daoism?
Remnants of ancient shamanism continue to color much Daoist religious thought and practice. In pre-Daoist times, shamans were tribal leaders possessed of extraordinary powers. Reports from around the 3rd century BCE describe how these fangshi, or masters of prescriptions, worked their magic. They could tap natural energies, exercise control over life and death, and assume the form of various powerful creatures. Shamanic specialists included many women as well as men. With the dawn of empire and agricultural economy, shamans became part of the governmental structure. Their duties included drawing spiritual powers to themselves as they entered into trance. Exorcism, explaining omens and dreams, influencing the weather for favorable harvest. Curing the sick, and divining heavenly portents at the behest of the emperor. A transformed shamanism lives on in various Daoist practices that are generally divided among the Black Hat priests, Red Turban Masters, and spirit mediums. Daoist ritual specialists still fend off evil spirits and perform a vestige of the ancient ceremonies symbolizing the shaman's journey to the upper and lower worlds. That spiritual journey of ascent and descent remains perhaps the most distinctive survival of shamanistic lore. It appears in various traditions in surprising forms, including, for example, Muhammad's famous night journey and ascension. Daoist ritual symbolism of the journey occurs in the masters pacing the clouds as he prepares the sacred space for the great religious observances.
What kind of calendar do Daoists and practitioners of CCT observe?
Firmly anchored in traditional astrological calculations, the Chinese lunar calendar consists of 12 months of 29 or 30 days, since the time between new moons is about 29.5 days. The lunar year dovetails with the solar with the intercalation of extra months at certain intervals. Reckoning began around 2637 BCE, so that the year 2000 marks the year 4637. Each of the 12 animals of the zodiac is associated with a particular quality or event and gives its name to every 12th year. Beginning with the rat, industry and prosperity, and proceeding in order through ox, spring planting, tiger, valor, hare, longevity, dragon, power and good fortune, snake, cunning, horse, perseverance, sheep. Filial piety, or goat, monkey, health, rooster, protection, dog, fidelity, and pig, home and family. The year 2000 is the year of the dragon, 2001 that of the snake, 2002 that of the horse, and so on. 5 full cycles, each named after one of the 5 elements: wood, fire, earth, metal and water, equal 60 years, an important interval for ritual purposes. Major annual markers are the winter, maximum yin, and summer, maximum yang, solstices and vernal and autumnal equinoxes. During each month, the most important times are the moments of new and full moon. Each month is divided into 10-day periods, 6 of those in turn considered a special time period, and 6 of those in turn equaling a full year. In addition, each year is divided into 24 climatic periods called breaths or nodes, described by such phrases as full of snow or clear and bright. Every year, month, day, and hour is further identified by a combination of 10 heavenly stems and 12 earthly branches, the monthly or zodiacal symbols. Branches and stems are primarily numerical designators, but each also bears important symbolic connotations. If you match one stem with one branch for succeeding years, S1/B1, S2/B2, S1/B11, S2/B12, S3/B1, and so on, you end up back at the beginning after 60 years. The result is an extremely detailed system of pinpointing special times according to a host of definitive characteristics. Each event occurring on Earth has its heavenly parallel. For every conceivable type of human behavior there is an auspicious moment. Thus, the calendar has been not merely a way of keeping track of times for religious observances, but a kind of temporal map for negotiating the cosmos as well.
What is religious Daoism and what are its origins?
Daoism refers to a wide range of philosophical, religious, and magical traditions dating from perhaps the 4th century BCE in China. Here the focus will be on the specifically religious aspects of these complex and ancient developments. The most ancient roots of the tradition were in shamanistic cults dating back perhaps several millennia to prehistoric China. Legendary imperial figures of that age, Yu, Shun, and Yao, are still revered as great sages. According to legend, Daoism formally began with Lao Zi's writing of the Dao De Jing, the classic of the Way and its power in the 6th century BCE. Scholars now believe the Dao De Jing actually dates from between 300 and 250 BCE. Teachings of the Dao De Jing came together with those of thinkers like Yang Zhu, 340 to 266 BCE, and Zhuangzi, 369 to 286 BCE, to form the broad conceptual basis of a wider Daoist tradition that had become largely philosophical, Daoqia, by the 4th century BCE. But religious Daoism, Daoqiao, was still a long way off. Solid scholarly research suggests that Daoism as a religious tradition begins in the mid-2nd century CE. It seems a teacher named Zhang Daoling, 34 to 156 CE, claimed that Lao Zi himself commissioned him to spread the teaching of the Dao. Zhang inaugurated the 5 bushels of rice movement, a reference to the suggested offering for would-be members, and built a religious polity in Sichuan province. According to legend, Zhang Daoling's emphasis on acquiring immortality culminated in his ascension into the heavens. Out of that movement grew the first and one of the most influential branches of religious Daoism, the Celestial Masters School. Religious Daoism has since developed numerous sects and schools, each with its distinctive emphasis on various spiritual teachings and ritual practices.
What is the Daoist Celestial Masters School and why is it important?
Daoism Celestial Masters School, Tianshi Dao, also called Zhenyi, correct one, stands out as the original institutional expression of religious Daoism and one of several early attempts to establish theocratic communities. It was originally known as the 5 Bushels of Rice School. The dues expected of members, the Celestial Masters School. Founded by Zhang Daoling, 34 to 156 CE, in about 142, the sect focused initially on physical, moral, and spiritual healing through ritual confession of faults and exorcism. Regular rituals included recitation from the Dao De Jing and communal meals, with special feasts 3 times annually to acknowledge the 3 celestial bureaucracies overseeing heaven, earth, and water. Over the centuries, the Celestial Masters School has worked to prevent the popularization of religious rituals by attempting to maintain standards in the training of ritual specialists. 2 main divisions, the Southern and Northern schools, developed more or less independently and then merged around the 14th century. After losing ground to various other schools for many centuries, the school has risen to prominence in modern times and now generally dominates the formal practice of Daoism and its rituals. The school is represented officially by the 63rd master who lives in exile in Taiwan.
Have Daoists traditionally sent out missionaries to convert others?
Daoism generally has not been a mission-oriented tradition. There have been periods in the history of China during which Daoist authorities have made it clear that life would be more difficult for non-Daoists. A number of Chinese emperors espoused Daoism as the official state creed, in effect, and attempted to cleanse the realm of Buddhists. And there have been times when Daoists have been in serious competition with Confucians. But on the whole, systematic missionary activity is not the essential ingredient in Daoism that it has been in Islam, Buddhism, and Christianity. When Daoism and CCT have spread, they have done so largely as a result of migration of Chinese merchant families.
Is there a Buddhist pilgrimage?
Just as meditators pursue an inward path to liberation, pilgrims seek the ultimate goal using external symbolism. Sites associated with the principal events in the life of the Buddha very soon became pilgrim goals. Some texts even suggest that the Buddha directed his followers to visit the places of his birth. Enlightenment, first sermon, and entry into nirvana. But Buddhists have beaten paths to hallowed places in China and Japan as well. Chinese devotees have mapped out a sacred landscape for pilgrim itineraries centered on 4 sacred mountains. Individual temples have also taken on a special aura. Perhaps as a result of an apparition or miracle, or by association with some famous holy person. Pilgrims head for those places both on special occasions and whenever the mood strikes them. Hope for spiritual benefits range from grace to get through a difficult time to healing serious illnesses. Japanese Buddhists also continue to follow a pilgrim road to numerous holy places. One of the most popular circuits is that of the 88 temples on the island of Shikoku. Their pilgrims retrace the steps of the venerable monk Kyukai, founder of the Shinjin denomination. From temple to temple, gathering spiritual souvenirs as they travel.
Do Buddhists pray in any particular language?
Even the earliest Buddhist practice apparently did not require any particular sacred or canonical language for prayer. People recited the scriptural texts and prayed in their vernaculars. Among Theravada Buddhists, the Pali tongue, distantly related to ancient Sanskrit, has functioned something like an official or canonical language, since the Pali Canon contains their full sacred text. But Theravada Buddhists across Southeast Asia also pray in their local languages. This all seems perfectly in character for a tradition whose foundational figure taught an egalitarian way that was neither based on any one sacred source nor structured according to any ancient hierarchy. Some of the more esoteric branches of Buddhism, however, retain the practice of using archaic texts that require special education to understand fully.
Why is the Chinese New Year so important?
Chinese New Year festivities are associated, not surprisingly, with renewal generally and with powers that hold the promise of protection for the coming year. During these celebrations, religious Chinese add to their regular roster of symbolism extra images of important figures like the 8 immortals and the deities of happiness, success, and longevity. New Year is not a specifically Daoist observance, but rather a more generic special occasion on which people are moved to intensify their awareness of essential values. Festivities begin about 10 days before the actual day. It starts when families send Cao Jun, deity of the stove, to give an account of the family's deeds over the previous year to the Jade Emperor. On New Year's Day, Cao Jun returns to his kitchen throne, where the family welcomes him with a fresh picture for the wall. Most families observe a series of private rituals. including elaborate meals and reverence to the ancestors. During the following 2 weeks or so, people pay special homage to the god of wealth. Festivities end with the Lantern Festival at the New Year's first full moon.
Is meditation important for Buddhists?
Buddhist tradition has refined a number of meditative practices. 2 important aspects taught by an ancient Theravada authority named Buddhaghosa, c. 400, are called dwelling in tranquility, shamatha, and insight, vipassana. In order to catch the fish of intuitive knowledge, one has first to get to the calm, clear lake. Attaining a measure of tranquility is a process of disciplined concentration in which the meditator gradually withdraws from sensory input through 19 successive stages of attentiveness and reflection. Insight meditation involves the discipline of observing sensory input with perfect mindfulness in order to arrive at genuine wisdom. Traditional explanations typically recommend shamatha before vipassana, but they go together and the process may actually be circular: tranquility leading to insight leading to deeper tranquility. Buddhaghosa suggests 40 objects for contemplation to eliminate distraction and lead to contemplative states. Each person is characterized by tendencies to one of the 3 qualities of lust, hatred, and delusion, and must focus on counteracting that major cause of distraction. To transform lust into faith, first meditate on physical impermanence and then on the virtues of the Buddha. Transform hatred into understanding by meditating first on love, compassion, and joy, and proceed to an awareness of mortality and physical dissolution. Turn delusion to deliberation by focusing on breathing as a means to calming. As for the achievement of insight, Buddhaghosa recommends the 7 purities. Here the meditator focuses on the purity of virtue, of mind, of belief, of overcoming doubt, of the knowledge of right and wrong action, of insight into spiritual progress, and of knowledge and insight themselves. Mahayana tradition adapted Buddhaghosa's classical methods to its teaching about the Bodhisattva's saving role. Each dedicated seeker progresses spiritually by meditating on the 10 stages of the Bodhisattva career. This is the steepest of paths, beginning with the accumulation of merit and knowledge and proceeding through multiple levels of meditative discipline.
Do deists and practitioners of CCT use relics?
Given the importance of ancestor veneration in Chinese religious traditions generally, one might expect that relics would enjoy considerable prominence. That does not appear to be the case, however. People pay homage to the dead in various ways, but rarely attribute to their mortal remains or residual personal effects the kind of miraculous power typically associated with relics in traditions like Buddhism and Christianity. Amulets of various kinds offer protection, and these may include the equivalent of second or third class relics. Personal effects of a holy person, or items said to have come in contact with the holy remains.
What kinds of special ritual objects figure in Buddhist worship and prayer?
Among the most common implements used in regular ritual are acoustic devices such as bells, gongs, and hollow wooden blocks. Prayer leaders will occasionally strike a large bronze bowl-shaped bell set on a pillow. As its vibrant, mellow ring decays into silence, devotees recall the universal characteristic of impermanence. When ritual leaders, sometimes accompanied by the congregation, chant sacred texts, they generally strike a hollow block of wood rhythmically to keep chanters together in their recitation. Incense burners and containers of sand into which devotees can insert their lighted incense wands are part of nearly every ritual setting. Sometimes devotees will approach a temple's large incense cauldron, waft the smoke toward them with their hands, and then rub it on various parts of their bodies for healing and general well-being. Esoteric sects typically employ a larger variety of objects. Tibetans use a small scepter symbolizing the indestructibility of the thunderbolt in one hand. The other holds a small bell whose vanishing sound represents impermanence. Some groups use weapons associated with Hindu deities who became part of the Buddhist pantheon. Some also use a begging bowl, as the Buddha did, or a fly whisk, symbol of adherence to the Dharma. Most basic among the ritual objects in both home and temple are the candle holder. 1 for the home, 2 in temple, flower vase, 1 at home, 2 in temple, and small censer. Other common objects include tablets or scrolls containing sacred names or mantras, either in Sanskrit or the vernacular.
What are the major types of Daoist religious observance?
Daoist sources talk about 3 levels of ceremony. Great services called qiao, which occur relatively infrequently. Ritual gatherings called fanhui, and feast days called ten. 2 essential features of every religious celebration are the preparation and the actual event. Zai refers to several types of purifying fast. Strictly speaking, the Zai is preparatory to the main ceremonial event, the offering or qiao, but certain distinct actions set the purification apart. Both celebrants and their sacred space need to be prepared ritually. To purify both mind and body, participants meditate in solitude, eat vegetarian meals, fast for a time, and refrain from sex. Preparation may commence as much as 3 days ahead for the major feasts, and continue through the main event itself. Celebrants prepare the sacred space through a combination of actions, including chanting and burning incense. A category of events called jiao includes various kinds of festivities. In ancient times the principal jiao were associated with planting and harvest. Eventually, various Daoist sects incorporated elements of the time-honored traditions into their liturgies. But the agricultural element became secondary. Different groups compiled extensive collections of liturgical rites in massive tomes, with specific ceremonies for a wide range of occasions.
Do Daoists and practitioners of CCT believe in demons or devils?
Demonic forces abound in the spiritual universe of millions of Chinese. Many demons are the unsettled spirits of the dead who roam the world in search of an elusive contentment. Some demons can herald good tidings, but most are disgruntled and thirsty for vengeance. Evil spirits, or gui, belong to a large category distinguished from an equally large category of generally benevolent beings called shen, a category that includes both deities and ancestral spirits. One of the essential features of Chinese thought on these matters is the notion that there are several different kinds of soul or spirit. The heavenly yang soul, called hun, rises at death to become a shen and abides from then on in heaven and in the ancestral tablets that have a prominent place on every home altar. The earthly yin soul, called po, returns to the grave with the body. Under certain circumstances, the po takes a negative turn and becomes an evil spirit. A gui, destined to create havoc for the living. Some of these evil spirits can be particularly dangerous, but unlike the devils of some other traditions, the gui are not particularly noted for their role in tempting humans to sin.
Have there been any Daoist mystics?
Traditional accounts of many famous Daoists describe their inner experiences in terms consistent with those often associated with mysticism. A mystic, in general terms, is a human being who through a variety of ritual or devotional practices experiences spiritual transcendence. Moving out of and beyond himself or herself, the mystic abides at least temporarily in a dimension very different from what most people experience most of the time. Some refer to the great Daoist figures as nature mystics since they enter into that different dimension by contemplating nature. They experience oneness with the cosmos intuitively rather than by reasoning their way to an intellectual conclusion. In a trance-like state, the mystic loses all sense of selfhood and individuality, becoming one with the Dao. Some have referred to the experience as the fast of the mind, in which one listens with the ears of the spirit. What exactly the experience feels like, Daoist sources are reluctant to say, but they readily offer advice about how to cultivate the experience. By way of exception, Some deist sources also hint that the occasional mystic has experienced a somewhat more personal form of union with the divine akin to what Hindu and other traditions call theistic mysticism.
Do deists and practitioners of CCT celebrate the birthdays of any religious figures?
Deities both great and small are generally thought to have birthdays because the vast majority of them were once human beings. CCT has transformed numerous figures originally deist, Buddhist, and Confucian into more comfortable characters, members of everybody's family, in effect. Other deities remain in their more exalted original deist forms. The following are only a few of the literally hundreds of divine birthday dates. Among the earliest in the year is the Jade Emperor, celebrated on the 9th of the first month. On the third day of the second month, CCT acknowledges Wen Changdijun, the god of literature and learning. Guanyin's birthday occurs on the 19th of the second month. Xiantian Shangdi, the supreme emperor of dark heaven, was born on the 3rd of the third month and is celebrated in some 400 Taiwanese temples. A quasi-deist deity called the Great Emperor who protects life, Bao Sheng Da Di, is celebrated on the 15th of the third month. Ma Ziu, often referred to as the Great Aunt or Grandma, has her celebration on the 23rd of the third month. On the 13th day of month 5 the general become deity Guandi gets his due. An otherwise anonymous city god's day is the 15th of the 6th month. Devotees of CCT observe the birthdays of Cao Jun on the 3rd day of the 8th month, and that of Tu Digong on the 15th. Also on the 3rd of that month deists celebrate the birthday of Si Ming, the director of destiny, known in CCT as the kitchen god or hearth deity.
What is meant by the term Chinese Community Traditions, CCT?
Much more ancient than religious or even earlier philosophical Daoism are the various currents of popular religious belief and practice that together comprise what will be referred to as Chinese Community Traditions or CCT. Historians of religion suggest that most Chinese who engage in public expression of religious beliefs actually belong to this broad popular stream. Many of their beliefs have deist connections, but, unlike Daoism as such, CCT has not been associated with formal religious institutions such as priesthood and monastic orders, and does not possess a scriptural canon. Many beliefs and practices now widespread in popular tradition also have roots in ancient Confucian and imperial cultic institutions, and in Buddhism as well. Countless CCT temples began to appear in towns and villages several centuries ago. Since they do not have their own resident ritual specialists, these temples often enlist the services of deist priests. but their day-to-day services are often handled by dedicated laypersons. Many such temples are associated with families who maintain them as a public service and a family tradition. Some elements of CCT also appear in temples ostensibly identified as Buddhist. A Guanyin temple in Honolulu, for example, combines Buddhist rituals with a host of other popular practices. Though the main image is that of the Buddha, numerous other icons are prominently displayed. That particular temple is run by a group of Chinese Buddhist nuns who are especially concerned with preserving the image that theirs is a purely Buddhist temple, in spite of the obvious diversity within it. Recently, when a visitor asked permission to snap a few photos inside, the nun in charge agreed. But whenever she thought his camera lens was wandering toward Confucius or another icon, she tugged his sleeve and waved a disapproving finger at him. Only Buddha, she insisted. Just a few blocks away, above a small upholstery shop, is the Lum family temple. There, all the deities are clearly of the CCT variety. Even though some are often inaccurately identified as deist.
Do people ever decide they want to depart from Daoism or CCT?
Membership in Daoism and CCT has rarely, if ever, been a matter of exclusive allegiance. Members of some major religious traditions, such as Islam, Christianity, Judaism, and, to a lesser degree, Hinduism, typically regard belonging as a kind of all-or-nothing affair. Either you're in, or you're out. Disagree with major tenets of the tradition, or neglect consistently and willfully to fulfill the minimum ritual and ethical requirements of the faith community, and your membership is in question or has lapsed altogether. Religiously involved Chinese generally do not think about membership in those terms. Belonging is deeply rooted in national and local culture, integral to the very fabric of society. Individuals who drift away from regular religious practice have not necessarily left, so long as they have not entirely cut themselves off from family and social connections. Other family members might express regret that sons or daughters no longer find the traditional ways helpful and have chosen to delete that part of their heritage from their self-identities. And many today sense the gradual diminishment of traditional values and practices precisely because of this sort of attrition. But Chinese, whether Daoist or CCT, generally do not think in terms of leaving the faith, unless they do so with the intention of converting to a missionary faith, such as Christianity. In those cases, people do talk of leaving behind unacceptable beliefs and practices.
What is the perfect realization school of Daoism?
Founded by Wang Zhe, c. 1123 to 1170, also called Wang Chongyang, the perfect realization. Chuanzhen, School is among the most important Daoist monastic orders. According to legend, Wang Zhe received new revelations from one of the 8 immortals, Lu Dongbin. Ascetic self-denial was a central feature in the order's discipline, including meditative practices designed to maximize yang energy and minimize yin. The founder evidently insisted on the importance of studying the teachings of Buddhism and Confucianism along with those of Daoism, but focused on the characteristically Daoist spiritual goal of immortality. Of its several branches, the Lung Men, Dragon Gate, is perhaps the most influential. Like religious orders in some other major traditions, the Perfect Realization Order historically has been socially active and responsible for preserving much traditional Chinese religious culture in times of turmoil. For example, they have done extensive refugee relief work and published a major edition of the Daoist scriptural canon in 1192 from the White Cloud Monastery in Beijing. The Lung Men branch of the order continues its work today.
Are dreams and visions significant powers in Daoism or CCT?
An ability to interpret the dreams of ordinary people has long been part of the ritual menu of Chinese religious specialists, beginning with the shamans of old. In ancient times, specialists called Zhanren interpreted dreams using divination and astrology as their tools. Powerful and famous people, too, report having revelatory dreams that move them toward a new course of action. Dream accounts therefore frequently function as an instrument of divine or spiritual legitimation. There is often a very fine line between dream and vision, except that one can experience a vision while awake. Religiously important visions or dreams frequently feature major deities, such as Lao Zi or the Jade Emperor, who deliver instructions or revelations to the dreamer or visionary. In addition, visualization techniques figure prominently in the meditative practice of some Daoist schools. The Shangqing school, for example, recommends that the meditator focus imaginatively on his or her indwelling deities, a technique similar to that used by several Tibetan Buddhist schools. By conjuring up intricate detail as described in the school's sacred texts, the meditator makes the presence of the God real and can thus unite with the divine presence.
How do Buddhists deal ritually with death and mourning?
Practice varies according to denomination and cultural setting, but there are a number of common elements. These include prayer at the deathbed and preparation of the body, a wake that includes final viewing. Funeral service typically in a mortuary or funeral home, interment, usually of cremated remains but with full burial in some circumstances, and a series of memorial services at intervals, beginning immediately after death and then in anniversary years calculated in various different ways. Viewing the body at the wake is a powerful reminder of the universal fact of impermanence. Funeral ceremonies center on recitation or chanting of appropriate sacred texts chosen to help mourners to see the event in the context of the full sweep of human existence. An officiating priest, monk, or minister may offer a eulogy, and participants make offerings of incense. In some places, like Japan, families inter the cremated remains either in a columbarium connected to a temple or in a cemetery on temple grounds. Memorial services are important in virtually all Buddhist denominations, especially when Buddhism interacts with ancient traditions of ancestor veneration. Many Mahayana Buddhists observe memorials 7, 35, 49 and 100 days after death, and after 1, 3, 7, 13, 17, 33, 50 and 100 years. Some consider the 49th day especially important, since at that point the soul ceases its wandering. Theravada practice often includes memorial services 2 days after death at the home, 2 or 3 days after that at the funeral establishment, and again 7 days after interment. The object of the last ceremony is to transfer merit from the living to the dead to ensure a good rebirth. Many Buddhists also offer a meal in the home or elsewhere for mourners after funeral services or interment.
Are there Buddhist rituals of marriage?
Marriage has generally not been an important religious rite of passage in Buddhist tradition. Perhaps that is because of the great emphasis on the centrality of monastic life. In various regions of Asia, other religious traditions supply the devotional settings associated with new beginnings. In Japan, for example, people generally either associate marriage with Shinto or consider it a purely civil ceremony. Some do use Buddhist symbolism in their wedding ceremonies. That might include, for example, offering incense and receiving the rosary as a reminder of a union witnessed before the Buddha. In the United States and some other regions where Buddhist missionaries have more recently introduced the tradition, Buddhists often use a modified Protestant ceremony. Held either outdoors or in a temple, the service may include brief readings from scriptures on the theme of compassion, a period of silent meditation, and a short sermon from the officiating priest or minister. An officiating monk or priest might also chant prayers from a scripture.
What is the most important Daoist observance?
A grand affair called the ritual of cosmic renewal occurs at varying intervals in different places. It was once on a 60-year cycle, according to the ancient calendar reckoning calculated with the branches and stems. Some temples celebrate this way as often as every 10 years now. Whenever a community erects a new temple, it is time for a renewal ritual. This major festival belongs to a larger category called Xiao. Ritual specialists from the so-called Black Hat group have exclusive rights to officiate in these events. A standard feature is recitation from the Jade Emperor scripture. And the focus of prayer is on seeking blessings of all kinds for the future. Massive organizational efforts precede the larger celebrations. They include interviewing prospective high priests from whom the committee can choose a leader, who will then arrange for a full staff of ritual specialists. Full-scale festivities require extensive construction of temporary altars or shrines. Celebrations nowadays typically go on for from 3 to 5 days. Though they formerly lasted as long as nearly 2 months.
Do Buddhists practice rituals of exorcism?
Since the Buddha emphasized that the individual was the only power of ultimate significance in the quest for liberation, he saw no need for formal ritual designed to do away with negative forces. Keen awareness of one's own motives and intentions would take care of all problems. Still, Buddhist practice has absorbed various indigenous forms of exorcism from virtually every culture in which the tradition has taken root. Many of the practices still in use in Japan originated in China and were brought to Japan by founders of Japan's Tendai and Shingon sects in the early 9th century. Japan's Nichiren school, a development of Tendai tradition, acknowledges 4 types of demonic possession. Phenomena range from pain caused by an angry spirit, to hallucinations, to possession by some animal spirit as signaled by personality changes, to severe disorders manifested in multiple personalities and voices. Priests of the Nichiren school undergo strict ascetical preparation before performing an exorcism. Someone close to the possessed person serves as a medium to the spirit world, speaking for the possessed person and delivering answers on behalf of the forces of good. In other cases, the exorcist deals directly with the possessed person. Wearing white, the exorcist recites from the principal Nichiren scripture, the Lotus Sutra, makes sharp noises using a set of wooden castanets, and interrogates the one possessed. Some Buddhists prefer exorcism as an alternative to psychotherapy.
Do deists and practitioners of CCT believe in angels?
Spirits of all kinds inhabit the ordinary world of countless adherents of Daoism and CCT. But none quite fit the precise description most readers would identify as angelic. Angels are generally understood as pure immortal spirits made that way from the start. Chinese deist and popular beliefs include countless immortal beings, but apart from the highest gods, most of those began as human beings and achieved immortality later. In addition, angels in other traditions typically function as messengers or guardians. A variety of spirits play those roles in deist and CCT lore. Perhaps the closest thing to angels in the Chinese repertoire of religious symbolism are the apsaras imported into China with Buddhism.
Is there such a thing as a deist saint?
Perhaps the closest thing in Daoism to what many people mean by saint is the ideal of human development called the sage, Zhen. Unlike ordinary people, the sage keeps his knowledge hidden. Because there is no need to impress or persuade others. A sage is thus like the silent, unobtrusive Dao. Neither does the sage labor over the right course of action. For love is squandered when spent on specific deeds rather than lavished equally on all. The sage understands that failing to yield is not to be confused with courage. The sage knows how to give without being emptied, how to take in without being filled. Completely in harmony with nature, the sage acts without intent, learns without studying intently. Chinese religious traditions often have elevated otherwise ordinary human beings to a status above the merely human. But there is no standard formal process by which this elevation takes place. In this respect, Daoism is closer to Islam than to Christianity, for example, where sainthood requires elaborate and lengthy investigation and verification. Emperors and others in authority have sometimes announced honors of this kind by decree. But sages are generally acknowledged as such as a result of grassroots movements rather than by pronouncement from on high. There is at least one other distinctive feature of the making of a deist sage. Whereas saints in some other traditions arrive at a level of spiritual perfection as a result of divine grace, the deist sage is a product of self-help.